Hello and welcome back to the Derby tutorial guide for Maya 2016. In this episode, we'll be covering baking inside Maya. The same method works in all versions, but in Maya 2016 it's a lot more reliable and you'll get much better results. In 2015 you'll have to go through many more options to try and get the same desired result, but I'll still try and walk you through the same path. So first off we have our high poly asset here. Right click object mode. As you can see there's too much geometry in that and we want to try and fake this onto this. So first off, select our low poly, click F, let's make sure in the modelling toolkit, UV editor. Make sure the UVs are perfect for this because they kind of have to be if you're baking, otherwise you could have some horrible seams and it's not going to come out perfectly. So first off, make sure you've got display checkered tile selected, spin around, make sure that's perfect, and as we can see, it's entirely even. So we go to the next step. Close the UV editor. And you don't have to do it this way, but I kind of enjoy doing it this way as it makes life easy when you got multiple assets. But first off, as we covered in the last episode, a few more layers. Make one layer for high poly, one layer for low poly, and we'll click our low poly asset, right click low poly, right click add selected object, same for the high poly layer. And we're going to add one on top of the other. So take our high poly, move it directly on top to make life a bit easier on ourselves. Now drag and select them both, move them to the centre, and go to Edit, Delete All by Type, History, select them again, make sure you've got both objects selected this time, and go to Modify, and click Centre Pivot. With this all sorted, we should be ready to bake it. So we can click, first off, click our low poly to make this easier. We can toggle off the high poly here, clicking the V. Go from modelling to rendering. Go to lighting, shading, transfer maps. Remove selected from here, clear all. Add selected with the low poly selected for the full UVs. Go to your source mesh. And for this, select your high poly. With that selected, click Add Selected on the source mesh, and it should be all fine. And the way this works is, if you go to your target meshes, on display, click both, and this pink envelope here, this is the radius for the baking. It will bake anything inside this area, so you may have to adjust it up or down depending on the size of the object, but 5% is perfect for what we want here. So that all set up, change it back to mesh, got this all set up here. Click remove map here. We want just a normal map at the moment, but you can do this for any type of map here. Normal map. Choose your directory. It's not important at the moment, but make sure your file format is, for the most part, a TGA or a target. Make sure these settings are the same for you. Scroll down, Maya common input, or common output. For the moment we're going to do 1024, but all the options you see here simply dictate the quality of the final bake. So this is texture resolution. Always keep aspect ratio, as texture maps for the most part need to be a power of 2. Make sure it's transferred in object space. Sampling quality, once again this is just basic quality. The higher you put these options, the longer it'll take, but the nicer it'll look, so we'll leave this on low, or let's change it to medium. Filter size and type, same principle. Just play about with the options, but as long as we've got the baseline set up correctly, you'll still get quite a nice normal map bake. As we saw in the UVing segment, if you have multiple edges or multiple faces sharing the same UV space, always click Ignore Mirrored Faces. This way it won't try and bake the same surface on top of another, it will just simply take the topmost surface and do this. For the most part, it will also take in consideration red faces and entirely ignore them from the baking phase. So now to advanced options. Make sure we're set to closest to envelope. You can change inside envelope than outside envelope, or inside envelope only, depending on the bake. As long as you keep it closest to envelope and have your envelope set up correctly, there shouldn't be an issue here. Make sure match using surface normals and click bake. And give it a bit of time, it'll load at the bottom left. This may take upwards of a half hour, or it could take a few seconds. It depends how big the map is. And then here you have it in the background. It should instantly apply it. So we've got this right here. Let's take off our high poly for the time being. Set the low poly here with the normal map instantly applied. Now toggle back on the high poly. Move it to the side. And if we close this transfer maps option, or move it to the side and you can zoom out, at a distance you really cannot tell the difference. is the power of a normal map. It will display much better if you use a height map or a displacement map, but we'll cover that in future episodes. So with that, if you want to see the map itself, or if you want to even make any changes, it's quite easy. Just change any of these options here, now we've got the two objects selected, and just rebake. We're both selected, and since all the options are already set up by default, it shouldn't matter that objects are not on top of each other, it should still bake perfectly. But still, future reference, always make sure objects are on top of each other directly before you bake it, otherwise issues can arise. So using this close transfer map so we don't need it anymore, click our low poly here, toggle on and off the textures at the top left here, to see it with or without, and you can see a massive difference. Or simply go to your attribute editor up here in the top right, second one across, go to Lambert 8 since that's our current texture, it may be Lambert 1 for you, and you can see it in the sample here. Or click the bump mapping, the small box next to it, and here's the normal map that we just baked. So we click view here, and that's your normal map. And with that, it takes all that information from the high poly, puts it on the low poly, and from that mimics that detail. Although for the most part, with most modern game engines now, you may not have to do this for smaller details, so you could physically model them in without any performance impact within Unreal 4, or Unity for that matter. But so it's a fantastic process to know, and with this you can put any detail from your high poly onto your low poly without issues, and when you're making more complex meshes, this is a must. So, with that all set up, now you understand the basics. In the next episode, we'll be covering the crease tool and smooth preview how we're going to basically make things like this. A basic high poly mesh that we can then use for baking in the future.